Are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do it. It's chunky today.
All right. So this one is courtesy of Father David on the Champions Lounge boards today. Fill in the blank. The thing that you are most excited about with Notre Dame football in 2024 is blank.
The thing I am most excited about Notre Dame football in 2024 is the defense combined with Mike Denbrock and Riley Leonard, because I think the defense is going to be better, and it was already a championship level defense. It ranked in top 5 in most categories. They were in really top 10 in the kind of last few, and they were number 1 in some of those categories as well. And so I think if and I assume it's going to elevate again next season, and then you combine that with a proven offensive coordinator and a guy that pairs well with the type of style that Riley Leonard plays with. I think that is what I'm most excited about, is the offense taking the next step with the defense getting even better.
Yeah, see, DK says OC, Anthony says offense under Denbrock, and that's where I'm going. I'm most excited to see what was already statistically a pretty good offense. Now, granted, there's going to be a lot of new faces out there, but the general philosophy worked for the majority of games. But I want to see, can Mike Denbrock bring this offense up to a level where it is more consistent over the entire course of a 12-game season and into the playoffs, and just what he is able to do with a quarterback like Riley Leonard after what he was able to do in a very short amount of time with Jalen Daniels down there at LSU. I'm not saying that he's going to turn Riley Leonard into Daniels, but at the same time, I think that the experience that he had with him is going to help him quite a bit. And I'm excited to see what this offense can be against what, at least going into the season, is not going to be the same kind of schedule, that Notre Dame had to face this year with some of the top-notch opponents that they had to face this year. So I'm just most excited about that Denbrock addition and what he can bring to this offense.
Yeah, and it's to get more specific about it, it's in the games that matter the most, right? Like Notre Dame hasn't had issues of recent with, pounding Navy or, Stanford this past season. Teams like that. I just want to. The offense needs to be better and more dynamic in the Florida State, Texas A&M, etc. games.
Yeah. This is a good one though as well. DK says no, but can he turn Riley Leonard into Riley Leonard? Because even before the injury this year, Riley Leonard, this year wasn't what he was the year before. So I think that's a good one. I think that's probably the most important thing, what exactly he can do with that. Where would you put Notre Dame on your way too early 2024 preseason rankings? We've seen some of these way too early rankings start to pop up.
Vince and I kind of discussed this last week in Rapid Fire, and it popped up, and at the top of everyone's list is going to be Georgia, Alabama. I think Ohio State belongs up there. Obviously, Michigan, kind of Old Miss. I'm not sold on Mizzou being good again. I'm not sold on Arizona as well.
Like, apparently Missouri's mad that Stuart Mandel doesn't have him. He's got him down there around 20 or something like that. I can't see a team like that in the SEC that's had one good year, being that good again next year. I find it hard to imagine.
No, you're okay. I think that the best fit right now for Notre Dame, or anything I'd feel comfortable with, probably like a 7 to 12 range. I think that's an honest kind of spot for where they're at. And again, we're talking about a defense that was already a national championship level defense in my eyes. Getting some key players back, also adding some players, and then the development of some of these younger guys that showed a little bit over the season. And then again, combining that with, Denbrock and Riley Leonard, you would assume the offense is going to be better. And so I think that is what propels them at least into the top 10.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes this tough is the transfer portal and what exactly everyone's going to get out of the transfer portal. Everyone's going to have some losses because it's college football, What exactly is Michigan going to lose, though? Is
A lot of roster turnover in Michigan.
Yeah, but like, is JJ McCarthy coming back? Is he
It's
going to
Harbaugh.
declare? We know Michael Penix is gone. Yes, Harbaugh coming back, and all these teams that are switching conferences as well. Washington and Oregon and USC going to the Big Ten. That's going to make a big difference in terms of who's taken some losses, probably earlier at different points in the season. But I like Notre Dame right around that 7 or 8 spot, though, as well. I think with what they've got we know that Notre Dame has got a championship level defense coming back, and they've got the ingredients to be a championship level offense. So going into the season, I put them right around that 7 or 8 spot. That's where I would drop Notre Dame heading into next year.
Nice. We agree.
Yes. By the way, I haven't seen Brent in here so far. He was looking for you last night.
He always comes real late. I think he's on that Monterey, California time.
Yes, and
he's my arch nemesis now.
There was more discussion about the spelling of your name when Brent jumped in last night. I think Salty dropped a reference to that earlier as well. Yeah, Salty. Eli Drinkwitz is mad about something? Very surprising. Very shocking. Very shocking. It's so weird because that guy looks like your high school science teacher. But then when he gets out there on the sideline, that guy, it's like Jekyll and Hyde. He becomes a different guy when he's coaching a game. So Jess, Vince and I talked a little bit about this last night. I'm curious to get your take. Did we see the last of Jim Harbaugh at Michigan last night?
I think this is a hard one to say. I think it's very dependent on the sanctions and how tough they are on Michigan, because I think he could very easily pull the Pete Carroll and ride off into the sunset into the NFL. But, as easy as it is to say that Jim Harbaugh could go back to the NFL, and he's had the interest before, I just don't know what that level of interest actually was. Was he just doing it kind of, flirting with the NFL to get Michigan to kind of, clamp down and tie him and extend him to a longer contract? I don't know. But the thing you got to realize in the NFL as a head coach compared to college, in college, you're basically head coach GM. In the NFL, you're just head coach. You don't have as much control, but you don't have to recruit as much, right? So there's trade-offs throughout the entire process.
Yeah.
I think Jim Harbaugh would want a role where he has a little bit more say than just being a head coach. And I don't know which NFL teams would offer that to him.
I mean, it is a good point. And for a guy coming out of college, how much control they would give him is curious. And like Bill Belichick, is he going to keep all of his GM duties out there in New England? We still haven't. Apparently, he and Robert Kraft met yesterday. We haven't heard anything about what's going to go on there. We're going to talk about Mike Vrabel in a little bit, but what led to Mike Vrabel being fired was the owner decided, hey, we just hired a new GM last year, and we're going to stick with the GM. So that relationship is a big thing, and that's the fact that Jim Harbaugh lasted for a decade at Michigan. One, I think it's a little bit easier because it was alma mater.
It's already been a decade.
Yeah, but the stops that he had been before, the things that you had heard was he wears out his welcome after a fairly short amount of time. That didn't happen at Michigan, but he also has the chance now. Like there are no regrets for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. He just led him to a national championship. So he wouldn't have to deal with, any guilt or anything like, hey, I'm leaving these guys without getting to
job's done
where we said that we were going to get. Yeah, the job's done. He's won a national championship. He wants to win a Super Bowl is kind of what we've heard. And there's been these dabblings, and there are 6 openings now in the NFL, and at least 2 of them have really strong interest in Jim Harbaugh. And I would think that if the Bears wanted to cut ties with Eberflus, that there would be a lot of interest there as well, but you do bring up a good point in terms of what kind of control he would get. I would think that he would have to sort of come to he would have to reckon with the fact that coming out of college, as successful as he is, that maybe they give him input, but that he's not going to have that kind of control. Even as a Super Bowl coach his last time around in the NFL, that he's not going to have that kind of control right away. You're going to have to be a coach first, and then maybe some of that, kind of gets added later on, depending on how things go.
Yeah, and
but go ahead.
You can comment all you want about Jim Harbaugh and Michigan and the wackiness and the the ongoing investigations that are going on. But to me, as much as it pains me to say it, Jim Harbaugh is a hell of a coach. Everywhere he's been, he's had success. Did he start at San Diego or San Diego State? He went from there.
San Diego. It was lower. Yeah, it was not an FBS school.
Yeah.
That he started.
So he started at San Diego. I think finished at 11-1 there. Went on to Stanford. Had good success there. Goes on to the NFL. Has 3 NFC championships, a Super Bowl appearance against his brother, and then he goes back to college and wins a national championship. So again, you could say what you want about Jim Harbaugh, but he produces wins, and he's a hell of a coach. And so he's going to find his spot. If he wants the spot in the NFL, there's going to be someone that's going to take that bait. It's just a matter of what's that power dynamic going to look like in the NFL, because it's not going to be like it was in college. He's not calling the shots 24/7. And he can't go out there and say as much wacky stuff as he probably does in the NFL.
Yeah, and I mean, personally, like the success that he has had the last 3 years at Michigan and winning the national championship, personally, it feels like this gives him an even bigger opportunity now, to go back to the NFL, because he's not like most college going to the NFL coaches. He's already had success in the NFL, and in these places that you're talking about, like the Chargers, the Raiders, those are 2 organizations where the things that have been talked about, like there would be, like they need it factor in hiring their next head coach. Even though I think, as much as it pains me to say, Antonio Pierce is a former New York Giants linebacker, and the fact that he won Super Bowls with the Giants, like he feels like a great fit for the Raiders, but you've still got Mr. Davis in charge out there, and probably feeling like he's got to make a big splash, like he thought that he was making with Josh McDaniel. But the Chargers, I think, feel like they need to make a splash. So Jim Harbaugh would answer that in either case.
I think the best marriage or the best landing spot is the Chargers. Him with what's on that roster, specifically Herbert, and then you bolster up some of that defense here and there. I want to that kind of scares me, honestly, because not that I have anything against the Chargers, but I think they would be kind of reborn again in a couple years, maybe even a year. Again, him working with Herbert.
Yeah, Mike, I'm gonna save your comment for the Mike Vrabel conversation. Mike Huff, I'm gonna save your comment for the Mike Vrabel conversation that we're gonna have here in a little bit, because of course Vrabel was let go today. So what do you think? And Anthony had this question up earlier. Anthony says he believes there will be an asterisk by this result of the national championship game. The years if the NCAA does the right thing, even though the right thing was to disqualify them this year. But he says he hates the cheating aspect, but he does give them props for beating Ohio State, Alabama, and Washington. I hate it, but it is the fair thing to do, is what Anthony says. That is a very fair comment, Anthony. What do you think, though, becomes of the sign stealing scandal there with Michigan, Jess?
I was I wanted to wait until, because I knew this would come up today. I didn't want to say anything on Twitter last night. I didn't, I think that Michigan deserves its evening, and we'll get into the scandal part as, we come down from the national championship and the college football season officially wraps up. But I think the first thing that comes to mind is Anthony brought up a really strong point. You beat Penn State, Ohio State, Alabama, and Washington. No sign stealing. So what was the whole point?
And you beat some of them with an interim head coach running the show.
Right. And so what was the point, right? Like you didn't need, it's clear you didn't need to get into this extravagant scheme, right? And so that's kind of my first take on this. Second take is I don't think it ultimately matters what the NCAA decides. I think Michigan fans, Michigan players, Michigan coaches will always recognize this as a national championship season. I think in their eyes, there is nothing that is going to be done that can take that away from them. So I think that's a big point to get in as well. And then third, what I think actually comes of it, it's just so hard to say. Are we talking about, reduction in scholarships? Are we talking about vacating wins in the national championship? Are we there's just so many options on the table for the NCAA. And I just believe they're not going to hit them with the hardest one, and that's vacating the national championship. I think something's going to happen, but I don't think the national championship is ultimately going to get vacated at the end of the day.
I don't think so. I don't think it will either. I've said before that I think that you levy a big fine against the head coach and or the school. Make someone pay a stiff fine, and like that money shouldn't obviously just go into the NCAA's pockets. There should be a series of charities someplace that money goes to. But this is like Michigan has tried to play this out like everyone steals signs. JJ McCarthy was talking about it. Well, Ohio State was stealing our signs, so we just had to find a way to catch up to what Ohio State was doing to us.
There's means and methods.
Thing, right? It's like apple, orange. Like they keep trying to compare two things that aren't the same, because I think just about everybody agree. I do hear some people defending them like, well, it's not that big a deal. Like some neutral type people. It's not that big a deal because everybody steals signs. There's still a difference in the way you go about it. It's one thing to steal signs from the other sideline or even from the press box during the game, as you're playing the game trying to steal the signs. But it's a completely different thing to do it in advance and doing it with the, detailed, complex system that Michigan had out there, with Connor Stallions, obviously, running this thing and the money that they were paying to send people to games and travel and, everything else that was involved and, recording them and the whole thing. It's completely different to do it that way than do it just like with the Houston Astros. It's completely different, to steal it from the dugout and then, do it that way than to use electronics and everything else like the Astros were doing. So Michigan can't just, claim, oh, everybody does it. They will claim everybody does it, but that excuse just doesn't hold water. And it feels like, based on the fact that Michigan was ready to double down and take this thing to court and they were going to fight it and everything else, and then all of a sudden the NCAA showed them what they had on them and they went, oh, okay, well, we'll just take the Jim Harbaugh suspension and we'll move on from there. So I don't know. I don't think that they ultimately vacate the wins, and I don't think that there's going to be an asterisk next to this. I think probably the biggest thing that'll happen at some point, Jim Harbaugh is going to be long gone, and right. They'll dock him some scholarships. And
that's the part to me that's a big part to me. Everyone's going to be gone by the time it all happens. The majority of this roster is turned over. Harbaugh will be gone. I think the remaining person will be
just
whatever
like Michigan's Final Fours. Look how long it took them to vacate Michigan's Final Fours from back in the, who cares at that point? Okay, so the banner's not there. Everybody knows what those teams did.
And that's what I was getting at, is by the point something actually happens in a potential vacation of wins in the national championship, people are already going to accept it. They're not going to, it's just going to be like, yeah, that was 10 years ago. We won it. You can't take it away from us now type mentality.
Yes. Which are you going to miss more next year, the Pac-12 or the 4-team playoff format?
I'm going to miss the Pac-12. I love the expansion of the playoff. I think it makes for, determining who the better Final Four teams is. I've seen a lot of tweets flying around. Congrats to Michigan, the college football invitational winner, right? And so, that's no longer a thing. I think you're going to get more teams in, more deserving teams, and you're going to let the parity kind of play out to see who is ultimately the best remaining team. And I've said it before. I hate the idea that the Pac-12 is, basically disintegrating as is. I don't like it. I think it's stupid that they're folding in, to these bigger conferences. I would have loved to see the Pac-12 hang around, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it's about the money, which we've discussed before. And so, yeah, I'm going to miss the playoff.
What's crazy
The
is
Pac-12.
The Pac-12, the Pac-12, after all this stuff happens and everyone knows the fate of the Pac-12, it had one of the best seasons that it's had forever. And it gets a team playing in the national championship game. It had been since the first couple of years of the playoff with Oregon and Washington getting in until this year that both of those teams are fighting to get into the playoff. And it wasn't even those teams that everybody was talking about coming into the season. It was USC and, Caleb Williams and Heisman Trophy and all that stuff. And I really don't want to see this overexpanded Big Ten, but what we want to see, like Michael Parks just said, life ain't fair. What we want to see and what reality is are two different things. So I'm going to miss the Pac-12 because things are going to change. And I don't know that it's necessarily going to change for the better. You're going to have some really good teams. Like what happens if we end up with 5 Big Ten teams in the playoff next year or the year after that? Like it's going to tick some people off too, right? Or, 5 SEC teams or whatever it happens to be with Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, So yeah. I'm excited about the 12-team format. I know like John says he's going to miss the 14 playoff field more, but I'm excited about the 12-team format because like what was everybody complaining about a couple of weeks ago with that Orange Bowl disgrace? All these players opting out. Well, you're not going to have all those players from a good team opting out, that quality kind of team opting out because they're going to have a chance to play in a playoff game instead of just a meaningless Orange Bowl.
Right. And I think the biggest thing that you said there was, unfortunately, you're always going to make someone mad and there's always going to be someone complaining about something, right? Like no matter if it was an 8-team, 12-team, 4-team, everyone's always, and that's unfortunately the world we live in. There's always going to be people finding a way to critique and criticize whatever is going on. But I think this is the best solution in terms of college football, an expanded playoff. You're going to see the best teams duke it out. And no one's going to be left out anymore, right? We're going to allow the game to decide itself, and I think that's how it should be.
Yeah. Like Anthony says 12-team format is great for Notre Dame, and I love the Irish. And like it could be 20 degrees next year in the middle of December, and Notre Dame might be hosting a playoff game. That would be pretty cool as far as I'm concerned. So that's it's another thing that I'm looking for. By the way, the CFP Board of Managers, there was thought that they were going to adopt the new format next for next year yesterday because of the Pac-12's dissolution, moving from the 5 automatic qualifiers and 7 at-large teams. 5+7 is how it's referred to. They were expected to vote to move it to a 6+6 because of the fact that there's only going to be 2 teams left in the Pac-12. So what that would mean is 6 automatic qualifiers and 6 at-large teams. But they have not voted on that yet because apparently there's like some things going on with these Pac-12 teams, and maybe they're going to revisit it in a couple of weeks. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on, what exactly happens with that. Anthony wants to know if you think Notre Dame would move a playoff game to Indianapolis if the weather is bad.
I think it depends on the team. I think if you're playing a team from California, there's no way, no shot that you're moving that game. That is advantageous to you. You have the home crowd, you have the home conditions, whatever it might be. But if we're talking about another Midwest team like Penn State or something, you know what I mean? A team that plays in it just as much as Notre Dame, I think it's more of a possibility. But ultimately, I'm leaning no. I would say like 90% no, but I think that there's a 10% small sliver chance that it would be the only way you would move it is if it was, again, a relative team. But you're not taking away your home field in the playoffs. It's the most important game of the season.
Yeah, especially next year. Maybe 10 years down the line if there's some unique circumstances or whatever. But I think Notre Dame's going to do everything they can to have playoff games on their home field, if at all possible. So a lot of talk, speaking of which, about where the national championship game was played. Do you have any problem with them playing it in Houston last night instead of, a more traditional, like bowl site, Orange Bowl, Sugar Bowl, one of those kind of places?
No, I don't. It's just a stadium where the game is played, in my opinion. As
I
long as it's
agree.
played in a relatively big city and it's indoors, I think you've checked all the boxes. I don't think it matters what bowl it is, what stadium it is. Again, as long as it's a nice stadium that can accommodate, a large capacity, I don't care one bit where the game is at.
I mean, Texas is a football state. They played it in SoFi Stadium. I wouldn't call California, a football state by any means. I don't think the venue matters. I think they want to have it in as nice and as big a facility as possible to get as many butts in the seat as possible. Now there are bigger places than where they played it last night, such as the Rose Bowl, and that's something that's been talked about quite a bit. There's been like this whole, should they play the championship game at the Rose Bowl every year? Do you buy or sell that? Would you want to see it at the Rose Bowl every year?
No, I do not want it to be at the Rose Bowl every year, because then I think it takes away from teams that get the opportunity to play in the Rose Bowl and not just the team that makes the national championship. I think the only way you could do it is if you did one of the early round games at the Rose Bowl, and then once you get down to the championship, you play again at the Rose Bowl. But I think it kind of, if you're only allowing the champions to play at the Rose Bowl, in the entirety of the playoff, I think it makes it a little bit, exclusive, and it takes away from, some of those other teams that might get that experience of just making it to that bowl game and getting that opportunity to play in a stadium like the Rose Bowl.
What I like is when Kirk Herbstreit started talking about this, and then fans were like, well, yeah, you get to sit up in the press box and we have to go, sit in bleacher seats, similar to Notre Dame, obviously, like the facilities are crappy. The place was built in 1920. It's an old, nasty facility, that whole thing. Everyone obviously loves the sunset out there at the Rose Bowl, but so keeping, whatever the facility is, I think it should be part of the rotation, but it should be a rotation, right? Just like the Super Bowl is in a different site every year. You need to move championship games around to expose different parts of the country to college football's biggest game. Like Indianapolis will probably host a national championship game at some point because they have a dome stadium. If Chicago ever gets their dome stadium built out there in Arlington Heights, they'll probably get to host it at some point. They're like, you need to move it around. I don't think it should be in one place every year, regardless of what that location happens to be. I think it needs to move around. So I've been teasing the Mike Vrabel thing. He was fired after 6 seasons as the Tennessee Titans head coach today. Scale of 1 to 10. How desirable is Mike Vrabel?
I saw this earlier today from a guy that is a Cowboys. I don't know if he is still now. He started off as kind of a Cowboys reporter, moved on to more of a bigger picture at Fox. And basically his tweet was
the David Hellman. Is that
David Hellman? Yeah. He basically said there's like 4 or 5 coaches that he would absolutely take, no questions asked. And Vrabel was on his list along with like Tomlin, Sean McVay. Who are the other ones? I think Kyle Shanahan was up there. And there might've been another one. I don't see that appeal, like Vrabel. Yeah. Are they good teams? Sure. Are they sound? Sure. Do they commit a lot of mental mistakes? No. Do they commit a lot of penalties? No. But on the flip side of that, they don't do anything that really wows you, right? Like that's the part to me is like,
but look at how the teams are built, like,
yeah.
Does that have something to do with it? Like, to me, the fact that he won 3 division titles with Ryan Tannehill as his quarterback and essentially
volumes.
Essentially Derrick Henry, pounding guys and running between the tackles and, just other than that, playing really solid fundamental defense. And I think, didn't they get to the AFC Championship game that first year, for first or second year,
Yeah, because they upset the Ravens, I believe.
Yeah.
But I think the other flip side of this,
go ahead.
The flip side of this is look at the division that they were in. The Texans, Jaguars, and Colts they're not horrible, but the AFC South wasn't strong, after Peyton Manning left.
Ryan Tannehill, Jesse.
No, I get what you're saying. I don't put him in that upper echelon of coaches that I would dump everything for, I guess is what I was getting at.
I wouldn't dump everything, but this is, of the Belichick disciples, this is the most successful of any of the Belichick disciples. Mike Vrabel.
No, and I agree with that. And to go back to the original,
I give him a 7, by the way, in terms of desirability. That's my
I think
number.
I'm like a 5 or a 6 maximum. I think I sit right around that 5 range. And I don't know. And him being defensive minded, I don't know about the offensive creativity. And I get what you're saying. He was handcuffed with Tannehill, and Henry was his bruiser. But I would like to see more out of out of offensive production and potential offensive creativity before I'm ready to commit, because everything else is fine with me. But we are in an offensive driven NFL. You got to score points.
See, and this is probably where, because Mike Huff had this comment earlier when we were talking about Harbaugh and, would he want control if he goes to the NFL? Mike says the control stuff is overrated. Head coaches have control. GMs go get what coaches want. Well, apparently not so much in Tennessee, because they hired Rand Carthon as their general manager last year. And that's where things have run amok, and why Vrabel is out, because apparently the GM wants to do one thing, Mike Vrabel wants to do another thing. And so the owner, rather than say, well, this coach has won 3 division championships. Granted, it's been 3 years now since he's been to the playoffs, but like the owner didn't back the coach. The owner backed the general manager. They just hired a year ago because there was a disagreement in philosophy and what they wanted to do. So I don't think that the control stuff is overrated by any means. Bill Parcells used to talk about, he wants to shop for the groceries, and, like a guy like Parcells, a guy like Belichick. I don't know as much with Vrabel that I would necessarily be giving him that kind of control, because longevity, track record isn't necessarily there, but Parcells and Belichick are definitely a couple guys you're going to give control to. And the more a coach shows himself over the long haul, like if his input is accepted and, player personnel, general manager type guys listen to that input, and then that input ends up working out, I think over time you build some of that up. But I definitely think that,
I get what you're saying, Mike, about,
butt.
Most GMs and coaches work together. Those are the successful teams. When the healthiest relationship is between the GM and the coach, there is no doubt that those are the most successful teams. But that's not every situation. I mean, and again, I hate that it comes back to this, but Jerry Jones literally fired a guy who won 2 Super Bowls because they couldn't get along together. Like, that was going to be the next words out of my mouth.
Jerry wanted more credit than he was being given. Jimmy Johnson was the guy who was making all those decisions, who turned all those Herschel Walker draft picks into actual bodies who could go out and produce and win you championships. In general, I think that they work together. Sometimes that's because the coach is forced to work together with the GM.
Right.
Like if a guy is given the opportunity, especially at a fairly young age, to be a head coach, then he's not, there's not much of a choice. He has to work with the GM. You hope that they're going to work together on a lot of things, but it doesn't always happen.
If I'm an NFL owner, I think that you should almost have simultaneous GM and head coach interviews, because those guys have to get along, right? Like that is a proven fact. I just said that those guys, if you want the best shot at success, those guys got to be on the same page. So it's like, you almost need to, interview them as a joint package to really see if the dynamic is going to work.
DK said Cowboys reference number 9. Sorry, DK, but we couldn't use a Lions reference there because they've had 2 good years in infinity of football in Detroit. So,
yeah, congrats on that first banner.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with what Mike is saying here for sure. The Bears, like if they want to upgrade Harbaugh, Vrabel, like compared to Eberflus, Vince and I talked yesterday, and I asked the question: should you keep? If you're going to keep Fields, can you also keep Eberflus?
No,
I don't think so either. At the very least, you've got to get rid of the offensive coordinator, but I think especially if you're the Bears and Harbaugh wants to
One
be
or
the
the
Chicago
other.
Bears head coach, that's a no-brainer to me. And even the New England Patriots with what they're, with the whole Belichick decision out there, apparently, Vrabel is Robert Kraft is pretty high on Vrabel, which he should be, because look at the success that Vrabel has had. I think that
He's a Patriots guy.
Yeah, I mean, that potentially complicates some things, right?
Yeah.
If you're really weighing whether or not you're going to keep Belichick and the whole thing, to me, it wouldn't be much of a decision, though. If I'm Robert Kraft, I would go after Vrabel with him sitting. I know Belichick has another year and all that stuff, but Belichick has shown with the personnel decisions that he has made the last, few years.
And then segue, did you hear, not maybe hear, but read, whatever it might be, that there were talks about the Titans trading Vrabel as a head coach to another team because he still has that contract, but basically they just said no because they didn't want to get into the technicalities of everything.
Yeah, because now that he's fired, obviously you don't have to worry about that. Yeah.
Right. I just think that's kind of crazy. You're just like, well, we don't want to do the paperwork, so or do something that might be more advantageous to the organization. So we're just going to fire you.
Why get a draft pick? Yeah.
Right. Why get something out of it,
But again, shows who's running the show. The owners think because they've got all the money, they've also got all the knowledge. But how's that worked out in Carolina? How's that worked out in Chicago? How's that worked out in a lot of places? How's that worked out in Dallas? Because they might have had successful seasons, but they obviously haven't had championships. And that's, at the end of the day, what it's all about. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Great stuff. Appreciate everybody for chiming in. Boo, Michael Parks. Boo, you and your Steelers. Take that someplace else. And yeah, Mike, I did see this stuff about Tomlin maybe stepping away after the playoffs. That would be crazy as well. All right, hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe, rate, and review. And we will be back tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.